what's going on?
Yeah. Over the course of the past multiple weeks since we determined that the Frontier proposal would not go forward, we have looked at what realistic options remain for providing broadband internet service in our town. We're at the point where we reached a decision that it's highly unlikely that any option available to us is achievable without additional financing that would have to be approved through the town process to raise the money. How much that might be depends on the particular options available to us. So we have proceeded to begin a new procurement process so that we may evaluate and select a provider for the town. We know who the likely respondents are to the RFP, but there could potentially be someone we're unaware of that exists out there that might come forward. Now, the RFP is ready to go, and it had been our intent that we proceed on a very expedited schedule so that this issue could come before the regular town meeting in May. It's a tight schedule, but our intent was to seek to start the process this Wednesday. Now, a number of issues have been raised here at the last minute, the most significant one of which I believe relates to potential financing. Mara, you might be able to speak to it more thoroughly, or Michelle, I don't know. But we had, as a committee, asked that certain financial issues, this was 2 meetings ago, that we raised the issue, what can we really do from a financial perspective? My understanding that, and I don't know, somebody else will have to answer whether this is correct. My understanding is that to the extent that the town authorizes financing, it must be for an asset that is owned by the town. Now, as our RFP is currently structured, it would not facilitate that approach. It would bring in a provider, but it wouldn't facilitate that approach. I believe that the RFP can be restructured in a way that would meet the financing needs as well as keep open the options that we're aware of right now. I don't believe that we can do that in sufficient time and vet it with legal counsel in order to make the regular town meeting in May. I think we would probably need to defer that to another special town meeting. But that's open to discussion with the board here.
Can I just start?
Sure.
So the idea of a special town meeting, I think, for broadband, we always said along the way that
That would probably
we thought it
done.
would be a good idea, that this is a big enough issue that it warrants its own meeting, but to handle this at the annual meeting would be difficult, I think.
We had previously talked about informational meetings, but this is a special town meeting where you would actually have to vote
Right.
on
And then you'd have
financing.
you'd have to do a ballot for proper 2.5 override.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So, in this idea of,
Can't hear you.
so sorry, it is true that, I believe it is true that town financing has to be for the acquisition of a town asset,
Yes.
correct? But what an asset is,
Is
to me, is what the question
Unclear.
is.
so
Well,
Do we
this is
have any
my-
guidance on that,
I
I guess?
Yeah.
There is we have some options out there that would allow for a portion of the work to be done either by the town or the town contract for it. I think the town could do that within the RFP process, actually arrange for the make-ready portion to be done and the town to take title to that portion. At some future date, the town may seek to unload that, but that would be after money was, we have options that could be covered entirely by the MBI grant allocation, but that would be after the fact, so we have to have interim financing, so we would need to tie that to some form of asset. The assets that would be potentially available through the make-ready process would be the poll licenses. It would be, which to an extent is somewhat of an intangible asset, but it is an asset. It would also apply to design services and the work that is actually done on the poles to move the wires to accommodate the new wiring. But as I've said, I think all of this needs to be vetted with appropriate legal counsel, and because that takes time, and because it will also allow us more time to educate the town on the options and how they might work. I think it makes sense to defer to a special town meeting, probably after the May meeting.
Okay.
Go ahead, Matt.
I agree it should be at a special town meeting, because there's too much on the agenda for the regular town meeting. And another week or 2 weeks or even 1 month isn't going to make a substantial difference. Now, today I called Ed Donald at MBI and had a lengthy conversation with him. And some of the points you made are the points that he made. He knows our goal, which is to get the entire town wired, or at least 96%, and at virtually no cost, or as little cost as possible to the taxpayer.
Ultimately.
Right.
Ultimately, we'll get to that. The first thing he did verbally was confirm what he told us before, that the grant would be available to the town, and the grant, I think, is $1.7 million or 1.7 and change.
Yep.
The grant would be available to the town under 4 conditions. The first is a 50% take rate. The second was upon completion of the project, when the town was either, I was unclear as to whether it means when the town is ready to be wired up or when the button is pressed. I don't know that there's, I think it's when the button's pressed. The third is that there's no litigation or arbitration pending, and basically no disputes, all the bills have been paid. A memo or letter to that effect has been prepared by Ed. It is being
He had promised us at our meeting with them 3 weeks ago that they would send that to us.
I asked him for the letter because I said I don't see how the town can award the project to someone who responds to the RFP unless the town knows it's getting the $1.7 million down the road. So the letter has been prepared, it's being circulated among those who must approve it, so we should be getting it soon. Next, I talked to him about whether or not the RFP should be originated from the town or an MLP. And he seemed, his initial response was, why are you using an MLP? You know you can't shelter the town from liability. I said, that's, we know that. But we also had the problem with the Department of Public Utilities saying that we might be regulating rates. And also, we don't want to go through a home rule petition, which could delay the project. He said, why would you need a home rule petition? And I said, well, financing, but I'll get to that in a moment, or the service agreement, which could run for 3 years.
More than
Could
more
run
than
for more than 3 years.
That's a
And-
limitation.
Right, and he said, well, I think we can deal with that. And a thought immediately came to my mind that maybe what he's thinking of is a service agreement that runs for 2 years, 11 months, with an option to renew. I don't know, and we'll have to run that by him. But that is a consideration as to whether or not we should forget about the MLP and just issue it through the town. In terms of financing, what I discussed with him was this. Let's assume the grant is 1.7. one of the companies that made a proposal but didn't respond to an RFP because we haven't submitted it, estimated that the costs would be about $1,345,000 and change. So I suggest what I discussed with him is that we would put in the RFP, or certainly in any agreement with a provider, a cap, not to exceed, that the make-ready expenses will not exceed, let's say, for argument's sake, the amount of the grant, or $1.6 million, so that there is no liability beyond that. He pointed out that the provider may then say, well, if we're going to cap it, if we're responsible for anything over that, then maybe we can't do the entire town. But that remains to be seen. I feel that if we got an estimate, and it's a reasonable estimate, it would be hard for somebody to say, I won't agree to a cap that's 20% above the estimate.
That's in one of the options.
And that's
that they make clear that it's an
but
estimate and they
that
don't.
should be
Right, they
in
don't know.
that should be in the RFP. And he said, make sure that in the RFP, we discussed it, that there will be a requirement for a cap on any, if we're required to assume make-ready costs, that there's a cap on it, number one. And spell out what those make-ready costs consist of. Not the numbers, but the items. For example, who's responsible for the HUD? Use that as an example. Then we discussed the financing, and he and I talked about exactly what you said, which would be, or what Michelle said, that the town would own that which it paid for, the HUD, the wires, the license. And he said, you know, what you're really doing is leasing that to the company that is the successful bidder, so to speak. And that would mean you would have an asset to finance. Now, the financing that I don't know who came up with the idea, and it doesn't matter, would be something like this. We would have not a bond, but a loan for, it's supposed to take 1 year for the make ready and 2 years for the build, so the whole town's ready. That's what all the companies have pretty much said. If it happens in less time, terrific. But if we have to lay out $1.5 million, $1.6 million, or $1.7 million, it would be over the first year. It wouldn't be on day one. It would be as we get bills for the build, you know, for the make ready. So over the course of 1 year, we have to lay out, call it $1.7 million. What we should be able to get is an interest-only loan for 2 years and 11 months, or something like that. 2 years and 364 days, just under the 3, and that fits the timeline
And
of
we've
the bill.
discussed that in the
Right.
committee.
So that when the 3 years come up, we get the grant, we pay off the loan, and the only costs that the town has incurred are the financing costs. We don't have to go through bond council or anything else. So that's what I discussed
You'd
with
have to
him.
have appropriation interest on.
Yeah, for the interest costs, which could be in the budget. You can do the math yourself, what they might amount to annually. You know, the first year would be a little less, the second year would be whatever the going rate is now for a town for 1 year, and then for the second year the same thing. And we might have cash available for it, and maybe excess, because if we took it, for example, out of free cash, and then we get the money back, we can replenish it. It's almost borrowing from ourselves. So this is the type of thing we can talk about without going through a bond.
And I think we need to restructure the RFP in a way that this make-ready process, some people have suggested the town do it all, others suggest we could do it for the town. I think we would expedite the process if we built the procurement process for the make-ready because otherwise we'd have to do a separate procurement for the make-ready services with the pole down.
I would like to
We could
see.
build that right into the RFP.
Exactly. I would like to
And
see
speed
the
up
town
the
that bids on it, that's gonna provide the service, that's going to do the build, do the make ready. And we'll pay for it
Yep.
as we get the bill. And maybe we'd have to hire an engineer or something just to certify or something, someone, maybe MBI would do it, to certify. MBI wants to know that the money it gives to us goes into something tangible. And that's why this idea of we own the hut, we
Well, they
own the
still
wires,
don't
etc.
intend to give it to us until after the fact.
No.
So-
Well,
It
and
has
that's
to
not
be
even
up to the
MBI,
town.
that's
Right,
just state
right,
law,
right.
you know,
So-
so I think we still have questions about what we can borrow for and what that is, what is the asset, and I've gotta believe that it has to be a reasonable amount of money, you know, you can't say, we're gonna borrow $5 million to buy a table, you know, I mean, it has to be, what we get, like what that asset is, has to be reasonable for the amount of money that we borrow, so who do we go to answer these questions,
What-
like,
We have a bond counsel, and our person who we do, and we have to take out a loan here.
so they tell us how to finance
Yeah.
what we wanna
But
finance.
bond counsel will be able to answer those questions, and we have a conference call on Thursday morning
They can
at
answer
10
that.
o'clock to be able to answer that. Steve Klein will be on that conference call along with Clark Rowell from the bank, the bond counsel, Mari, we'll all be on the call
Oh,
at 10
good.
o'clock on Thursday morning. And those are some of the questions that need to be answered,
Okay,
and
good.
they will be addressed at that time.
And that's Thursday
But
morning?
one thing
Thursday
I would say,
morning at
Michelle,
10.
is that there's sufficient information out there to suggest what to make ready. I mean, as we have the one estimate that you mentioned, so we know pretty much the right cost and the right ballpark for.
But that's kind of a different
What
question. We know what make-ready costs, but what's the asset that we have
Yeah,
that comes
well,
from
if
financing that,
it's-
and does that match?
But if
And
to a
that's
certain
what's
extent,
important.
it's an intangible asset. But it's nonetheless a real asset in the sense that you couldn't move forward without it.
Okay, as long as the state agrees with that. I mean, we can't make it up as we go.
Well, if the
So I
state
just
wants to
wanna
throw
make
up yet
sure.
another obstacle to people.
No,
No, this is stuff
Ed-
that's
yeah,
there.
Ed-
I think we just needed answers,
Ed gave
like,
me
does
some
this?
specifics, I mean,
Right,
and he
on
said,
what it
feel
was.
free to call, like the hut, the wiring, the license agreement. He said essentially what the town is doing is licensing those poles and that equipment, not licensing, leasing
Yeah.
those poles and equipment to,
And we're
purveyor.
we're leasing space on the boat. We're
yeah,
eager
exactly.
to expedite
And
this
that's-
too, because other towns, not just in Massachusetts, but in New York State, are submitting these license applications, and National Grid and or Verizon only have X number of people assigned to this task, so the more applications they have, the longer the process takes to complete the make-ready. So the faster we can act, the better.
The one thing I think we don't have to worry about is, well, it seemed like you were saying financing something and keeping it under 3 years. That's not, I don't think that's a restriction. The 3-year restriction is if we can't enter into a service agreement
said
with any company for any longer. But if we're financing an asset, that can go
No,
for,
the service agreement is
20
what
years,
he
yeah.
talked about, and all he said was, I think we can deal with that.
yes.
And I don't know what, I couldn't keep him on the phone much longer, so I
The
don't know.
length of time we need to finance is just until we get MPI portion of money.
Yeah, that's gonna be
That's it, okay,
max
yeah,
of
it's not,
3
it's
years.
not about 3
Correct.
years necessarily, okay.
So moving forward, Richard, are you waiting till after you get some more information on Thursday after this call?
Well, I would, yeah, that's one piece,
Okay,
but I think we need to vet our approach with legal counsel as well.
okay.
And, resolve, if, you know, if it's a town procurement through 30B, that's a different situation, and it could slow us down, even if you believe it's gonna be kept under the 3 years. I think the MLP approach still gives us greatest flexibility, but it does also raise a question then of low bid versus quals-based. We're focused on a quals-based selection. And to the extent that we have an asset piece that we're asking them to cap, that could look like a low bid for, it's not really construction, but that part needs to be vetted with council. It's a complication.
Council meaning
I would,
who?
MLP council, I would say, or, I mean, I don't know whether our town council, how familiar town council is with, both 30B procurement and MLP procurement.
I guess
So there's two things going on. There's one is we're saying if we have to go by a home rule petition, that could take a long time.
Yes.
But then we're also have MBI saying we think we can deal with it, which can take a long time. So,
Yeah.
we're at this point again where we have to decide, okay, which way can we go, or can we pursue parallel paths with that?
Well, that'd be nice, and that it would take them a long time.
no,
No.
and of course, everything does.
Right. It's just
But-
based
but
on
he
history,
said they
and
are-
it's not a definitive answer. Like, you know.
You know, for example, the memo, that the letter he is gonna send us, they promised that
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, but we'll get it.
Well, I think we ought to ask Jeremiah if he feels,
I would just say that we've worked a long time with Rick Holland on this
Yes.
project, and we
With
should
Rick
continue working with Rick Holland on this. He's been working with us and understands this,
Yes.
so that's what I would recommend, that we.
And he's very efficient, because he already knows the subject pretty thoroughly,
Yeah.
so it's not as if.
He knows
it
our
costs us a lot.
efforts, and he knows
Yes.
the history of
he
them.
wanted to get
So-
him after the telephone
After
call.
Thursday, do you wanna be in that loop for that call? I'll make sure that.
You're gonna do it from here, initiate from
No,
here, or-
it's gonna be a conference call. I think Clark's going to initiate it from his office, and he will just tap in all of us wherever we are. So I'll email Clark tomorrow and get everybody's, give me your whatever phone number you wanna use, and,
So then, on behalf of each board, you'll both be present at both calls to then.
Well, Steve's
be
gonna
able to
on the
report
call,
back
but
to-
but that's not a quorum, so
right,
that's
Right.
all
Steve,
Okay.
Steve and Richard and Clark and bond counsel, Mari and I.
All good news.
Okay. And then,
So, just moving forward, you are going to revisit the RFP,
Absolutely.
and at some point, we'll definitively decide whether it's MLP or
Right,
town,
right.
and at that point,
But we need to go through these couple of steps first.
Bond council and,
right,
And it's not-
town county council, yeah.
And it's not
And
gonna be at the end of
then
that.
we figure out what the schedule would be, a timeline going forward again for a special town meeting. Again, for those who are
All right.
listening, and I think Matt made clear here, essentially, the amount of money that we're looking to finance would be an interim financing that ultimately would get paid off by NBI and wouldn't be a continuing town obligation.
I have a question.
Tom?
So my first question is, everything you're saying that MBI told you we've heard before, and they never put anything in writing. Are we gonna be able to guarantee people at a special town meeting that the state is going to pay the money within a certain amount of time? Are they gonna put it in writing?
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yes.
we can't
Yeah.
tell the
The
people.
answer is
Yeah.
yes,
So if we
or
don't have
there's
that
no
guarantee,
point in
what
He
going.
said that, he said the letter has been prepared, he prepared it, and he's circulating it for approval. I said, can we expect it within the next week or two? And he said, absolutely.
And he's told us that 3 years ago, so.
Tom,
We
what do you
will
want me to
not
do?
move forward unless we have specifics, because we
But
need to have those
seem to be able to
specifics in
move
our hand.
forward, because all that happens is they make us promises, and here we are still at the same point.
I know.
And my
What's the
second
alternative?
question would be, why do we have a broadband committee? You all are doing all the work up there. What's the purpose of the broadband committee?
Okay, Tom, Michelle, did you have something you wanted to say?
I was just like, I understand your frustration, but what's the alternative? I don't hear the alternative. And why do we have a broadband committee? Well, because we were digging into these questions and writing the RFP, and that's why we have a broadband
left the
committee.
meeting on Wednesday with an RFP, and we said we're going to bring to the town, pass it by you all on tonight, and then Wednesday, we were gonna release it. And all
Yes,
of a
but-
sudden, there seems to be all these other
but
issues
Tom,
that the broadband
there
committee
are.
did not look into.
There were questions. There were questions
Well,
on.
who got those questions?
Okay, Tom, hold on. There were questions on whether it could be an MLP, okay? Number
That
one,
was the
that was a,
only
that
question.
was a valid question, and there is question on financing. And we've always had the financing question. How do we go forward with the financing question? And that's always been
But
there.
then you all,
So-
I got an
so at
email
this
telling me
point-
there's other
okay,
things,
hold on.
DPU and
So,
all this
so,
other stuff.
Tom, stop. So at this point, what we're trying to do is get these questions answered. The only way to get them answered is to go with bond counsel who is experienced in this and understands it and knows how to do it and knows municipally what we can and can't do, how we can and can't do it. If we don't have those answers, then we don't have anything to bring to the town, because we can't, because we will not have the answers that someone's going to ask us. So therefore, we're doing our due diligence. Yes, is it frustrating? Absolutely. We've been sitting here for 5 years doing this. Do you think we wanna be sitting here doing it again and again and again? No. We wanna make sure we get it right, and we get it right so that everyone in town gets wired. We don't want half of the town wired and the other half sitting like they are now with absolutely nothing. We wanna get everybody into the loop. We wanna get something that everybody can have. And that's always been the goal. Yes, there are obstacles that are falling in our place. We're working through them as fast and as best we can, but it is the way it is. We're sorry. Nobody's more frustrated than this board has been over these things happening over and over and over again, and the amount of time we've spent on going through contracts and hoping we had something and thinking we had something and to have it fall through at the last minute. Let's not do it again.
And
I
might
think
add
on
to that
behalf
also-
of the board and the broadband committee, we're agreed on a process of how we're proceeding here,
Correct.
and we're gonna proceed with all due haste, but carefully.
Yes.
Right, and
Thank you.
I would add to that, the broadband committee was never set up with the intention of being a unilateral committee. I sit on that board as well, and I go to our chief procurement officer and I talk to her about what we talked about at the broadband meeting, and I get feedback, and it raises other questions, and this is a process of groups. Broadband committee was never intended to be a unilateral group.
We just need to be kept informed on the basis.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard.